The flower fields stretched toward the horizon, a sea of color under the morning sun. Lila worked the earth, her palms stained with dark soil, clearing debris from around the stems. Nearby, the low hum of villagers provided a steady rhythm to the morning. She reached for a stubborn weed, pulled, and felt the soil give way. Then, the rhythmic sound of iron on stone interrupted the air. A horse slowed, its hooves crunching against the gravel path. Lila stood up, wiping her hands on her apron, and turned to face the road. A young man sat atop the horse, his gaze fixed on the rows of roses rather than the path ahead. He pulled the reins tight, bringing the animal to a complete halt. Silence settled over the garden, thick and expectant. He leaned forward, watching her work with an intensity that held the air still. He spoke, his voice low and clear. "You bloom as brightly as the spring." Lila looked up, meeting his eyes, and the quiet promise of the morning shifted. The air felt warmer, charged with a sudden, unexpected focus. Each morning the prince returned. He dismounted, left his horse to graze, and knelt beside Lila in the dirt. They worked in tandem, pressing seeds into the cool earth and clearing pathways through the rows. Their laughter cut through the quiet of the fields, turning the garden into their private sanctuary. But the peace had a witness. High above, on the marble balcony, the king paced. His shadow stretched long over the stone, tracking every movement below. He stopped, his knuckles white against the railing, and watched them share a moment of ease. The king turned, strode into the hall, and returned with his heavy scepter. He brought it down against the marble floor with a sharp, echoing crack that silenced the birds. "A commoner shall never grace this throne," he bellowed, his voice vibrating across the valley. The prince looked up, then back at Lila, his face tight with a conflict he could not resolve. Guards appeared at the gate, their movements stiff and final. The prince rose, mounted his horse, and looked back once before riding toward the palace gates. Lila remained where she knelt, her hands hovering over the unfinished rows. As the silence returned to the garden, heavier and colder than before. The sun dipped below the hills, casting long, bruised shadows across the petals. Lila stood alone, her fingers tracing the edge of a rose, watching the prince vanish behind the palace walls. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the rhythm of her own breath against the cooling air. She whispered to the empty garden, "Your happiness is my only wish." Then, the light died. The sky did not fade to twilight. It bruised into an ink-black void that swallowed the horizon. A sudden, heavy stillness pressed against the valley, making the ears ring. Then, the first gust hit. It was not a breeze, but a physical blow that sent grit stinging against her skin. Branches groaned, the wood protesting under the sudden force. High above, the clouds churned like boiling water, blocking out the last of the stars. Lila watched as a nearby oak whip cracked, its limbs snapping with a sound like a gunshot. The garden began to tremble. The wind tore through the rows, flattening the stalks she had spent weeks nurturing. She looked at the fragile buds, then up at the darkening sky, realizing the scale of the destruction. The gale shrieked, tearing at the soil, and she braced her feet against the rising mud, knowing the garden was about to be erased. The gale roared like a living beast, tearing at the roots of the kingdom. Lila did not retreat. She threw herself flat against the soil, curling her body into a protective arc over the fragile, trembling sprouts. The rain arrived as a solid wall of water, driving her face into the mud. Every strike of thunder vibrated through her ribs, rattling her teeth and numbing her limbs. She dug her fingers deep into the earth, anchoring herself against the wind that tried to peel her away. Time dissolved into a rhythm of lashing rain and physical resistance. Her muscles burned, shivering with the cold, but she did not budge. A branch crashed down inches from her head, showering her in debris, yet she kept her back curved, a living shield against the elements. Her breathing grew shallow, ragged, and thick with the taste of wet dirt. The storm hammered at her, demanding she yield, but her grip on the earth only tightened. Eventually, the strength drained from her veins. Her vision blurred, turning the world into a spinning dark smear. She gasped, her chest heaving against the cold soil, and then her hands went limp. She collapsed fully into the churned mud, motionless, as the thunder continued to hammer the valley above her. The sky cleared to a pale, hollow gray as dawn broke over the valley. The storm had vanished, leaving the earth churned and scarred by the night's violence. The prince galloped into the center of the garden, his horse stumbling over the broken stems and hardened mud. He pulled the reins tight and slid to the ground, his boots sinking into the wet, cold soil. He stopped. Where Lila had fallen, the earth was no longer barren. Dozens of cup-shaped blooms had forced their way through the muck, their petals glowing in shades of crimson, gold, and pink. He knelt, his knees pressing into the damp ground, and reached out. His fingers hovered, trembling, before brushing against a single waxy petal. "Lila," he whispered, the sound barely audible over the morning wind. "You are still here." The flowers did not wither. As the days passed, they multiplied, spreading across the meadow until the entire landscape was a sea of color. The villagers came, kneeling in the dirt to tend the new growth, naming them tulips. They became a living monument, a testament to a love that refused to fade. Lila was gone, but the garden remained, painting the kingdom with the enduring spirit of her sacrifice, a legacy that would bloom for every spring to come.